Hello, I'm Wanda Morris, the Vice President of Advocacy for CARP. And today I'm here talking to Rebecca Morris of the BC Alzheimer's Society, talking about the 5 myths of dementia. Now, Rebecca, one of the things that we hear from our CARP members, and in particularly CARP members in BC, are concerns about dementia, and they're thinking that dementia and Alzheimer's disease is the same thing. Can you clarify that?
That's a big one, and I would say that that's probably the #1 question we get at the Alzheimer's Society of BC. What's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? A lot of people think that they're 2 words that can be used interchangeably, and in fact that's not the case. Really, Alzheimer's disease is one kind of dementia, and there are many kinds of dementia, such as frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia. There's a long list of different kinds of dementia. The other thing that we tell people is that a lot of times there can be signs that look a lot like dementia, but in fact aren't actually dementia. So they might go to the doctor complaining of memory problems, and it might not in fact be Alzheimer's disease, but rather they are having challenges because of menopause, because of certain kinds of cancer, because of a urinary tract infection. There's a long list of things that can look a little bit like dementia.
If I do get dementia, is it fatal?
It is a fatal disease. We know that this is a terminal disease and it's progressive, which means that it'll continue to get worse over time. But what we always tell people is that a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean that our life is over. We can continue to live as well as possible with this disease for quite a long time.
And isn't it inevitable that as I age, if I'm lucky to live long enough, that I'm going to get dementia?
No, and that's another really common myth that we hear at the Alzheimer's Society of BC. Age really is the biggest risk factor. So if we were all to be lucky enough to live to be about 90 years old, about half of us would probably develop one kind of dementia or another. But there are many people who live to be very old and will never develop dementia. And there's also people who develop dementia earlier on in their lives, people who are in their early 40s, their 50s, sometimes even their 60s, in exceptionally rare cases, people in their late 30s.
Is it true that dementia is genetic?
That's another big question for people. We want to know, well, my mom had it or my dad had it, am I going to get it? For most people, the link isn't as clear as that. We kind of talk about there being 2 kinds of Alzheimer's disease, sporadic and familial. For people with sporadic Alzheimer's disease, there's typically not a super clear genetic connection. We might inherit certain genes that increase our risk slightly, but those genes are things that can be mitigated within a whole host of other risk reduction strategies. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But for some people, they'll have what's referred to as familial Alzheimer's disease. For people who have this kind of Alzheimer's disease, there is a really clear connection at every level of the family tree. So it's not as simple as, well, my mom had it, but rather my mom had it, her sister and brother both had it, her mom had it, and I've already got cousins starting to show signs. For these families, this often occurs before the age of 65, which is what we refer to as young onset dementia.
I've certainly heard people say that once someone has dementia, that there's really no point in interacting with them. Is that true?
Absolutely not. It certainly is a disease that changes the way that we're able to communicate and the way that we're able to interact with the world around us, especially as the disease progresses. But this is a progressive disease, meaning that early on in the disease, somebody might be able to have a conversation pretty much the same as they've always had. As the disease progresses, that will change. But just because somebody isn't able to understand what's going on around them and respond in a verbal way doesn't mean they don't understand what's going on around them in other ways. I think the worst thing we can do is talk about people with dementia like they aren't there. We really want to engage them in conversations even if they're not able to respond.